Yes, I most certainly did raise it during a bilateral discussion with Secretary Pompeo and also in the broader discussion. And as Secretary Pompeo said at the press conference just a short while ago, the United States stands with Australia in seeking to hold Russia to account for its role in the downing of MH17. And we had an extensive discussion about the support that the United States has already provided, particularly in the UN Security Council, and the fact that Secretary Pompeo joined in the G7 statement condemning the tragedy, the atrocity, and also holding Russia to account. And again, in the communique from this Australia-US ministerial meeting, there is a reference to holding Russia to account.
Donald Trump has a very, it's my word, but unorthodox approach to international relations. Is there something to be said for that? What benefit is there in him sort of changing up the system, if you like?
From my observation, he focuses very much on personal relationships, and that has been to our benefit as well. President Trump and Prime Minister Turnbull get along very well, and that's assisted us in getting unprecedented levels of access to the White House and to the US government. But I think the President also focuses on what hasn't worked in the past and comes up with new and innovative ways of doing things differently so that we get a better outcome. And while 6 months ago people would have been astounded that there was to be a summit between the leader of North Korea and the President of the United States, what has happened is that we're now talking about stability on the Korean Peninsula rather than military conflict.
And yet it also creates substantial volatility having Donald Trump involved. Does that create a reason for Australia to be a little more cautious with its relationship with the US?
Australia has a strong and enduring partnership and alliance with the United States, and that will not change. In fact, at this meeting we committed anew to our alliance and our levels of cooperation across a broad range of issues, but most notably our support for an open and free and inclusive and prosperous Indo-Pacific. So the United States' view of the world continues to align with ours in regard to the key national interests that Australia has.
Did you get any undertaking on a new ambassador to Australia or Donald Trump visiting Australia later this year?
We certainly talked about a whole range of issues, but the choice of ambassador is a matter for the United States. We're working very closely with Jim Caruso, the Chargé, but I don't think it's any reflection on the depth of our relationship.
How much discussion was there about Chinese influence, not only in the South China Sea but also in the South Pacific? How big a concern is that for the US, and how could the two countries work collaboratively on that front?
We talked a great deal about the Indo-Pacific, and within that discussion we also talked about Australia's role in the Pacific, particularly the South Pacific, but the US role in the North Pacific. And we welcome more investment in the Pacific. No one country alone can provide all of the support that the Pacific needs, and we discussed ways where we could work constructively with China to ensure that the investment from China and indeed from other nations drives sustainable economic growth in the Pacific.
And what about this so-called debt trap situation that Tonga is now in? I mean, is that sort of a red flag for other Pacific nations, but also something for countries like Australia and the US to be aware of in terms of the regional dynamic?
We are working with Tonga to ensure that it can manage its finances in a way that leads to sustainable budgets and economic growth. We work with a number of Pacific nations in that regard, providing our expertise and advice. And we also want to be a partner of choice with the Pacific, a natural partner with the Pacific Island nations in providing support to them so that they can realise their aspirations of a better standard of living, a more economic growth in their country.
So might Australia help Tonga pay that in some way?
Well, what Australia is doing is supporting Pacific Island countries with advice and expertise on how they can manage their budgets. We're also offering alternatives. You will have seen in Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands we're supporting the financing of a undersea telecommunications cable, because that directly leads to increased economic growth and prosperity in those two countries.
What about freedom of navigation patrols? Has the US made a request for Australia to actively participate in those in the South China Sea, and will we?
We already participate in upholding the rights of freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. Australia sends our ships and our planes through the South China Sea in accordance with international law, and we've been doing that for a very long time. The United States has a global freedom of navigation, a global FONOPS program, which it conducts in accordance with its capacity and abilities, but we conduct our own freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight
and we
exercises.
don't plan to extend that at this point?
Well, we are already doing it. We're already taking part in exercises through the South China Sea.
Final question. Overall, the talks with Mike Pompeo and Jim Mattis, how would you characterise those, particularly at a time when the administration has put various allies on notice in regards to their relationship?
It was an extremely productive and fruitful meeting. It was timely because Secretary Pompeo has just been appointed Secretary of State in recent months. We had the opportunity to discuss a very wide range of issues that affect our national interest and how we can work together. It reaffirmed our joint commitment to the alliance and our partnership and our aligned view of the world in so many areas. So it's been a very productive meeting and again underscores the level of access that we have to important figures in the Trump administration.
Minister, thank you.
Thank you.